The seventh pup was no longer breathing. That was the thought that struck Clara Whitfield before fear could even find a name. The storm had swallowed the edge of Blackpine territory whole, burying the narrow road beneath nearly 2 feet of snow and rattling the shutters of her little cabin like impatient hands. For 3 nights, something had come from the forest after midnight. Not a person. Not a neighbor. A wolf. The same enormous black wolf with frost gathered along its shoulders and eyes too intelligent to belong to any ordinary creature. Each time, it had left a child on her porch. One wrapped in a flour sack. One with bare feet tucked under a torn blanket. One so frightened she had forgotten how to speak. Clara had taken them all in, because there were some doors a decent soul did not close. But tonight, when the scratching came again, soft and urgent beneath the roar of the wind, she opened the door and found the black wolf standing there with its head lowered. At its paws lay a tiny boy, no older than 4, bundled in a dark military cloak much too large for his thin body. Snow clung to his pale lashes. His lips had lost their color. His small chest did not rise. For one frozen second, Clara forgot how to move. Behind her, 6 orphaned pups huddled near the fireplace, their wide eyes reflecting the flames. They had already learned not to cry too loudly in a world that punished unwanted children for needing comfort. Clara felt that truth like a bruise beneath her ribs. Then the wolf gave a low, broken sound, not a growl, not a warning, something closer to a plea. Clara dropped to her knees in the snow. The cold bit through her nightdress, sharp as pins, but she barely felt it. She slid her hands beneath the child and lifted him carefully against her chest. He weighed almost nothing. Too light for a life. Too still for a boy who should have been laughing, spilling soup, chasing shadows across her rug with the others. "No," she whispered, backing into the cabin. "Not at my door. Not tonight." The black wolf remained on the threshold, watching as if the whole forest had stopped breathing with it. Clara kicked the door shut against the storm and carried the boy to the hearth. The other pups parted silently, making room without being asked. Little Hannah, the youngest girl, held out the last dry towel. Mason, who had arrived the first night, pushed a warmed brick closer with both hands. No one spoke. They simply watched Clara work the way children watched the only adult who had not turned away from them. She wrapped the boy in layers, pressed her palm to his back, and leaned close enough to feel for the faintest sign of life. Nothing. Her throat tightened, but she would not let despair enter the room. Despair was too heavy for children. It took up too much space. "Listen to me," she said softly, though she did not know whether she was speaking to the boy, to the frightened pups, or to the moon hidden behind the storm clouds. "This house does not give children back to the dark." Outside, the black wolf lifted its head. Far beyond the cabin, deeper in the pines, more wolves answered, their calls low and solemn, circling through the winter night like a secret being passed from one shadow to another. Clara heard them, but she did not look away from the child. She rubbed warmth into his small hands, breathed steadily, and held him as if her arms alone could argue with fate. The fire snapped. The wind pressed its white face to the windows. Then, beneath her palm, so faint she almost missed it, something fluttered. Once. Then again. Clara went perfectly still. The little boy took the smallest breath. Around her, every pup in the cabin inhaled at once, as if they had all been waiting for permission to hope. Clara closed her eyes, tears warming her cheeks before she could stop them. She did not know that the wolves outside belonged to the Alpha King. She did not know they had crossed half the northern kingdom to find her. She only knew that another child had arrived at her door, and while she still had breath in her own body, not one of them would be turned away. The boy slept until dawn, curled beneath 3 quilts beside the hearth, his small fingers locked around the sleeve of Clara's dress as if some part of him feared the world would take him back if he let go. Clara did not move. Her knees ached from the hard floor, Her back burned from the hours of bending over children, and smoke from the fireplace had left her eyes red and tired, but she stayed exactly where he needed her to be. Morning came pale and quiet over Blackpine, turning the frosted windows silver. One by one, the other pups woke. Mason checked the door first, brave in the way frightened children taught themselves to be brave. Hannah carried half a cup of water with both hands and offered it to Clara like treasure. The little girl who had not spoken since arriving simply pressed her cheek against Clara's shoulder, warm and silent. Clara smiled for them because they needed the shape of safety more than they needed the truth of her exhaustion. Once, she had smiled like that in the nursery house at the center of the Pack village, where every cradle was labeled by bloodline and every blanket was folded according to rank. Back then, Clara Whitfield had believed kindness could earn a place. She had believed if she worked before sunrise, mended every shirt, soothed every fever, and remembered which children hated carrots and which ones feared thunder, the Pack would one day stop seeing only the word Omega when they looked at her. But Blackpine respected strength that could be measured. Speed. Rank. Scent. Teeth. Clara had none of the things they celebrated. Her wolf was quiet, her voice was gentle, and her hands were better at calming than commanding. The mothers trusted her when no one important was watching. The children reached for her before they reached for their own tutors. But the council called that softness, and softness, in Blackpine, was treated like a stain. The day they dismissed her, she had been standing in the nursery doorway with a feverish pup asleep against her chest. The child had been found near the southern road with no family mark, no Pack scent strong enough to claim him. Clara had refused to place him outside the gate for the border patrol to collect. She had said he was too small to understand politics. Daniel Cross had hurt her. He had smiled as if she had proven every cruel thing he already believed. By sunset, her apron was taken, her room cleared, and her name removed from the nursery ledger. They gave her this cabin at the edge of the territory because no one wanted it, a slanted little place where the wind came through the boards and the forest leaned close enough to listen. They thought exile would teach her obedience. Instead, it taught her how much a person could build with almost nothing. Now 6 children breathed around her, and a 7th had just survived the night. Clara looked at their faces in the firelight and understood, with a calm that settled deeper than fear, that Blackpine had not sent her away from her purpose. It had sent her directly to it. By the second morning, Clara stopped pretending the forest was finished with her. The black wolf returned just after sunrise, when the sky was the color of watered milk and the cabin smelled of oatmeal, wood smoke, and damp wool drying near the hearth. Clara had been cutting one apple into 7 careful pieces when Mason whispered, "Miss Clara, the trees are moving." Every child turned toward the window. Beyond the frosted glass, dark shapes passed between the pines with impossible silence. Not one wolf this time. 3. They came from different sides of the clearing, their black coats dusted with snow, their breath rising in white clouds. Clara felt the old fear rise in her throat, the fear every Omega learned young when power entered a room, even if that room was only a clearing outside a crooked cabin. But none of the wolves bared their teeth. None rushed the door. They approached with the grave patience of messengers carrying something sacred. Clara opened the door before they could scratch. Cold air swept in, lifting the edges of the blankets hung over the windows. The children pressed close behind her, small hands gripping her skirt, her sleeve, one another. The largest wolf stepped forward and lowered its head. At its feet sat a little girl in a blue coat, maybe 6 years old, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one missing ear. Her cheeks were chapped from the cold, and her pale hair had been braided by someone who must have loved her very much before the world changed. Behind the second wolf stood a boy with round glasses cracked down one lens, holding a tin lunchbox against his chest like a shield. The third wolf carried a bundle in its mouth with such tenderness that Clara did not breathe until it set the bundle down and nudged the blanket open. Inside was a baby, awake, blinking up at the gray morning with solemn blue eyes. Clara felt something in her chest fold and ache. Not sadness alone. Recognition. These were not lost children who had wandered too far. They had been delivered. Chosen. Trusted to her without a single word. "I do not have enough beds," Clara said, though she was already stepping aside. "I do not have enough bowls. I do not have enough anything." The largest wolf looked at her with those strange winter-bright eyes, calm and unblinking. Clara let out a breath that almost became a laugh, though her eyes burned. "Except room," she whispered. "I suppose I still have room." The little girl in the blue coat crossed the threshold first. She stopped in front of Clara and looked up as if expecting to be measured, judged, and found inconvenient. Clara knelt, slow enough not to frighten her. "What is your name, sweetheart?" The child swallowed. "Ella." Her voice was no louder than falling snow. Clara offered her hand, palm up. "Hello, Ella. I am Clara. Breakfast is not fancy, but it is warm." That was all it took. Ella stepped into her arms, stiff at first, then suddenly trembling so hard Clara had to hold her tighter. The boy with the lunch box followed without speaking. The baby began to fuss, and Hannah, solemn with importance, ran to fetch the cleanest towel. Within minutes, the cabin changed shape around them. Chairs became beds. Blankets became walls. The kitchen table became a place for bowls, bandages, mittens, and tiny socks drying in rows. Clara moved from child to child, tying, warming, washing, listening. She did not ask what packs had sent them away. She did not ask whose laws had failed them. Names were enough for the first day. Hunger was enough. Fear was enough. By noon, there were 10 pups beneath her roof, and the cabin sounded less like exile and more like a heartbeat trying to remember its rhythm. Outside, the wolves remained at the edge of the clearing, watching through the snowfall. Clara saw them whenever she crossed the room, still as carved shadows among the trees. She wondered who had taught royal-looking beasts to trust an unwanted omega with children no one else would claim. She wondered why they kept coming. But when baby Noah finally fell asleep against her shoulder and the boy with the cracked glasses whispered thank you into his oatmeal, Clara stopped wondering long enough to make the pot stretch one more serving. By late afternoon, the smoke from Clara's chimney had given her away. It rose in a steady gray ribbon above the pines, too thick for one lonely omega, too warm for a cabin that was supposed to stay quiet. Clara noticed the silence first. The wolves at the tree line had vanished. The birds had stopped picking at the snow. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She was kneeling beside the hearth, teaching Ella how to stir honey into warm milk, when Mason came from the window with his face gone pale. "Someone is coming," he said. Clara stood slowly. Through the glass, she saw lanterns moving between the trees, 5 of them, then 7, then more. Boots crushed the frozen path. Men in dark coats followed behind Daniel Cross, the local alpha of Blackpine, his shoulders squared beneath a fur-lined cloak, his expression polished with the kind of authority that never had to explain itself. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside before the children could see him reach the door. The cold struck her cheeks, but she lifted her chin. Daniel stopped 10 feet from the porch and looked past her to the glowing windows, where small silhouettes shifted behind the curtains. His mouth curved, not into a smile, but into judgment. "So the rumors were true," he said. "You have turned a border cabin into a hiding place." Clara kept her voice calm. "It is a home. It is a violation." He removed one black glove finger by finger, as if even the air around her was unclean. Unregistered pups. Unknown bloodlines. Possible rogues. Possible spies. Do you understand what you are sheltering? Clara thought of Ella's stuffed rabbit, of the boy with the cracked glasses whispering thank you, of baby Noah asleep with both fists tucked under his chin. "Children," she said. The word landed between them, simple and impossible to twist, but Daniel's eyes hardened anyway. Behind him, Two councilmen exchanged uncomfortable looks. They had known Clara since she was a girl. They had brought their own infants to her when fevers ran through the nursery. Now they stared at the snow instead of her face. Daniel took a step closer. War leftovers are not children of Blackpine until their blood is proven. You do not get to collect them because your soft heart aches. Clara felt the insult, but it did not cut as deeply as it once would have. There were 10 pups behind her now. 10 reasons not to shrink. A hungry child does not need paperwork before dinner. One of the younger men lowered his gaze, but Daniel's voice sharpened. By order of the Blackpine Council, every pup inside that cabin will be surrendered before the new moon. They will be evaluated, separated if necessary, and placed where the pack decides they belong. From inside, a small sound escaped, a frightened breath too quiet for most ears but loud enough for Clara. She did not turn around. She would not let the children see her fear first. Daniel leaned nearer, his words low enough that only she and the closest men could hear. And if you refuse, this cabin will be sealed. Your supplies will be seized. Your name will be struck from pack protection entirely. For a moment, the clearing blurred around her. Clara saw the old nursery door closing in her face, the ledger with her name erased, the long walk to this forgotten cabin with everything she owned in one bag. She had survived losing a place before. But the children behind her had already lost too much. She breathed in the scent of pine, smoke, and warm milk drifting through the cracks behind her. Then she looked Daniel Cross directly in the eyes. You may remove my name from every book you own, Clara said softly. But you will not teach those children that they are unwanted while they are under my roof. The clearing went still. Daniel's face tightened, not with surprise, but with the irritation of a man hearing no from someone he believed had been born to say yes. He stepped back and pulled his glove on again. The new moon is in 3 nights. His gaze moved over the cabin one final time. Be careful, Clara. Mercy becomes dangerous when it forgets its place. He turned, and the lanterns moved away through the trees, one by one, until only dusk remained. Clara stood on the porch long after they were gone, her hands cold, her heart steadying itself beat by beat. When she finally went inside, every child was awake, watching her. Mason tried to look brave. Ella clutched her rabbit so tightly its worn ear bent beneath her fingers. Clara closed the door, slid the bolt into place, and knelt in front of them all. Nobody is leaving tonight, she said. The words were not loud, but they filled the cabin like another fire. That night, Clara did not sleep. After the children settled into uneven rows of blankets across the floor, she sat at the kitchen table with a candle burning low, counting everything she had. 2 sacks of oats. Half a jar of honey. 4 potatoes with soft eyes beginning to sprout. 1 loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. A tin of tea. 6 clean bandages. 11 children now, if she counted the baby sleeping in the drawer she had padded with towels. 11 small lives breathing beneath her roof while the new moon moved closer with every hour. Clara pressed both hands flat against the table and told herself not to think of what she lacked. Fear loved empty shelves. It lived in thin blankets and quiet cupboards. But hope, she had learned, could begin with a single match and a woman too stubborn to let the dark win. Before sunrise, she pulled on her boots, wrapped her shawl tight, and stepped outside with an axe nearly as old as the cabin. The snow reached halfway to her knees, and each step took effort, but she crossed to the woodpile and began splitting the smaller logs first. Not because she was strong, but because the children needed heat more than she needed rest. By the time the sky turned pale, Mason was standing in the doorway wearing boots 3 sizes too large. I can help, he said. His voice shook, but his chin did not. Clara wanted to send him back inside. She wanted every child to have the kind of morning where adults handled the hard things and little boys only worried about breakfast. Instead, she handed him the basket. Then you carry what you can. Not more. Soon the cabin woke into motion. Ella folded blankets with serious care. Hannah sorted mittens into pairs that did not match. The quiet girl, whose name was Lily, lined cups along the table and filled each one with water. Clara moved among them, gentle but steady, turning panic into tasks small enough for children to hold. She nailed a loose board across the back window. She stacked firewood beside the hearth. She stretched soup with water, herbs, and every potato she owned. When the baby cried, she carried him on one hip while stirring the pot with her free hand. When the boy with the cracked glasses apologized for taking up space, she knelt in front of him until he met her eyes. "Children do not take up space," she said. "They belong in it." By noon, someone had left a crate at the edge of the clearing. Clara found it half hidden beneath pine branches, filled with flour, dried apples, wool socks, and a small bottle of medicine sealed with black wax. No footprints marked the snow around it, only the clean oval prints of wolves. Clara lifted the bottle into the light, her breath catching at the unfamiliar crest stamped into the seal, a crowned wolf beneath a crescent moon. She did not know whose symbol it was, but she knew a warning when she felt one. Someone beyond Blackpine was watching. Someone powerful enough to send supplies without asking permission. She carried the crate inside, and the children gathered around it as though Christmas had come early to a house that had not dared expect gifts. For one bright hour, there was laughter. Real laughter. Ella tried on socks that reached her knees. Mason bit into a dried apple slice and closed his eyes as if tasting summer. Even Lily smiled, small and startled, like she had forgotten her face could do that. Clara turned away before they saw the tears in her eyes. She had been given one more day to keep them warm. One more day to prove that love could be organized into bowls, blankets, and clean hands. As evening fell, the wind changed. A low howl rolled through the forest, then another. Farther away. The children froze. Clara went to the door and looked out across the blue snow. Between the trees, the black wolf stood watching her, still as midnight, silver eyes fixed on the cabin. Clara did not know whether it had brought her a gift, a warning, or both. She only opened the door a few inches and whispered into the cold, "Tell whoever sent you that I am grateful. And tell them I am not leaving." The wolf lowered its head once, almost like a bow, then vanished into the pines. Clara closed the door, slid the bolt, and turned back to the children. They were all watching her, waiting to learn what courage looked like when spoken softly. She picked up the hammer again and set another board against the frame. "No child leaves this house unwanted," she said, and this time, every pup in the room believed her. The new moon arrived without stars. By dusk, the forest outside Clara's cabin had turned the color of charcoal, and the windows reflected only the small golden world she had built inside. 11 pups sat close to the hearth with bowls of soup balanced in their hands, quiet in the way children became quiet when they sensed adults were afraid. Clara moved among them with a calm she did not feel, smoothing hair, checking blankets, adding one more log to the fire though the woodpile had grown thin. Every sound seemed larger than it should have. A spoon touching a bowl. A chair leg scraping the floor. The baby sighing in his sleep from the padded drawer near the stove. Clara told them a story about a rabbit who outsmarted winter by inviting every lost bird into his burrow, and for a few minutes, their faces softened. Then came the first knock. It was not loud. It did not need to be. 3 firm strikes against the front door, followed by Daniel Cross's voice carrying through the wood. "Open this door, Clara." Mason stood so quickly his bowl tilted, spilling broth across his sleeve. Ella clutched her rabbit to her chest. Lily covered the baby with both hands as if silence alone could hide him. Clara lifted one finger gently. "Stay." Then she crossed the room and stopped with her palm against the door. "The children are asleep," she said, though everyone inside was awake enough to hear her heart. Daniel answered from the porch. "Then wake them. The council order is final." Behind his voice came the shuffle of boots, the creak of lantern handles, the low murmur of men who wanted their obedience to feel like duty. Clara looked back at the pups. They were not looking at the door. They were looking at her. That was the moment she understood what fear could become when someone smaller borrowed your courage. She slid the inner latch into place. No, silence followed. Not peaceful silence. A tightening one. Then the handle turned. The door held. Daniel's voice lost its polish. Do not make this harder than it has to be. Clara stood straighter. Taking frightened children from a warm room is already hard enough. The next sound came from the back window, a scrape against the board she had nailed there herself. Several pups cried out, and little Noah, the boy she had revived on the first night, stumbled forward to help Mason push the kitchen table against the wall. He was too small to lift anything heavy, too brave to understand that bravery did not always need to spend itself. Clara turned just as his knees gave way. The room seemed to tilt. Noah sank onto the braided rug, one hand pressed to his chest, his breath quick and shallow, his face suddenly pale beneath the firelight. Noah. Clara was beside him before the others could move. She gathered him carefully, her arms forming a shield around his trembling body. Look at me, sweetheart. Just look at me. His blue eyes fluttered, searching for her through panic and exhaustion. Outside, voices rose. The door shook once in its frame. Inside, everything narrowed to the fragile rhythm beneath Clara's hand. Too fast. Too uneven. Too afraid. Clara pressed her palm over his heart and felt helplessness rise like cold water. She had mended socks, stretched soup, soothed nightmares, and argued with men who thought law mattered more than mercy. But this was a child fading beneath the weight of too much fear, and no law in any kingdom had prepared her for the sound of his breath slipping away from calm. Please, she whispered, not to Daniel, not to the council, but to whatever ancient power watched over lonely cabins and unwanted children. Do not take him from a place where he is finally safe. Warmth stirred under her palm. At first, Clara thought it was the fire. Then the warmth deepened, silver and gentle, spreading from her chest down her arms as if moonlight had found a way to live beneath her skin. The cabin filled with a soft glow. The children stopped crying. Noah drew one long breath, then another, steadier this time. Clara felt the fear loosen inside him like a knot coming undone. Around the room, every pup lifted their head at once. Clara heard them without sound, not in her ears, but somewhere deeper. Miss Clara? Are we safe? Her own voice answered inside her before she could understand how. Yes. You are safe. You are all safe with me. Outside, the pounding ceased. Beyond the walls, the forest answered with a howl so low and powerful that every lantern on the porch went still. For one breath, no one moved. The glow around Clara's hands faded slowly, sinking back beneath her skin like moonlight slipping under water, but the silence it left behind was not empty. It was listening. Noah rested against her, breathing evenly now, his small fingers curled around the edge of her sleeve. The other pups stayed close, their eyes wide with something deeper than fear. They had felt her voice inside them. Clara had felt theirs, too, each fragile thread of worry and hope braided into a bond she did not know an omega could carry. Then the porch boards creaked. Daniel Cross spoke again, but his voice had changed. What was that? Clara did not answer. She rose with Noah in her arms and looked toward the door. Outside, another howl rolled through the forest, nearer this time, joined by a second, then a third, until the whole tree line seemed to breathe with hidden life. The men on the porch began murmuring. Lantern light shifted wildly across the windows. Someone whispered, "Those are not Blackpine wolves." Clara set Noah gently beside Mason and stepped to the door. Every instinct told her to stay inside, to keep the bolt drawn, to make herself small as she had been taught. But the power that had moved through her had left one thing clear and steady in its place. These children were not a mistake. Neither was she. Clara lifted the latch and opened the door. Cold night air swept across her face. Daniel stood on the porch with the councilman behind him, but none of them were looking at Clara now. They were staring past her cabin, toward the woods. From between the pines came the black wolves, one after another, silent and immense, their coats dark against the snow, their eyes reflecting silver beneath the moonless sky. They did not rush. They did not threaten. They formed a wide circle around the clearing with the solemn discipline of soldiers taking their posts. Daniel's face drained of color. "Royal wolves," one of the councilmen breathed. The words passed through the men like a sudden winter wind. Clara's hand tightened on the doorframe. Royal wolves belonged to the crown, to old bloodlines, to stories told in low voices beside guarded fires. They did not answer local alphas. They did not enter pack territory without purpose. The largest wolf stepped forward, the same one that had first appeared at Clara's door. Frost shimmered along its shoulders. Its silver eyes found hers, and for the first time, Clara felt not only intelligence in that gaze, but recognition. Then the wolf lowered its head. Not to Daniel. Not to the council. To her. A path opened through the ring of wolves. From the darkness beyond them, a man walked into the clearing. He wore a long black coat dusted with snow, no crown, no armor bright enough to announce him, yet the entire night seemed to make room for his presence. Tall, still, and pale beneath the winter sky, he moved with the quiet authority of someone who did not need to raise his voice to be obeyed. His hair was dark, his face sharp and controlled, but his eyes were the same silver as the wolf's. Clara knew before anyone said his name. Every man on the porch dropped to one knee. Daniel was the last, and even he could not stop himself. "Your Majesty," he said, the words rough with disbelief. Alpha King Adrian Blackwood did not look at him. He looked past Daniel, through the open doorway, at the children gathered behind Clara in patched blankets and mismatched socks. His gaze moved over the bowls on the table, the beds made from chairs, the medicine bottle with the royal seal, the boards nailed across the windows, and finally Noah, alive and steady beneath Mason's protective arm. Something shifted in the king's expression, so small that only Clara might have noticed. Pain, perhaps. Or shame. He stepped onto the porch, and Daniel immediately lowered his head farther. "We were enforcing pack law," Daniel said quickly. "These pups are unverified, and this Omega has acted without authority." The king was silent long enough for the words to wither in the cold. Then he turned his silver eyes on Daniel. "Without authority?" His voice was calm, deep, and terrible in its restraint. "My wolves have crossed 3 territories bringing orphan children to this door. They passed forts, councils, pack houses, and men who call themselves protectors. Not one opened faster than she did." Clara felt the children move closer behind her. The king looked at her then, fully, and the force of his attention stole the breath from her lungs. Not because it was cruel. Because it was careful. As if he saw every sleepless hour, every stretched meal, every small hand she had held through fear. "Clara Whitfield," he said, and her name in his voice sounded less like a question than a vow beginning. "I came to learn why my wolves kept choosing you." His gaze softened, just enough to change the shape of the night. "Now I understand." Adrian Blackwood stepped inside Clara's cabin as if entering a chapel built from broken things and stubborn hope. The room was too small for him, too warm, too crowded with blankets, bowls, boots, and frightened children pretending not to stare. Snow melted from the hem of his black coat onto the wooden floor, but he seemed not to notice. His eyes moved slowly, taking in every detail Clara had stopped seeing because survival had made it ordinary: the flour dust on the table, the row of tiny socks drying near the stove, the baby sleeping in the padded drawer, the patched quilt tucked around Noah's shoulders. Behind him, Daniel Cross remained on the porch, silent now, stripped of all the confidence he had carried. To her door. Clara stood between the king and the children by instinct, though she knew how strange it must look, an unwanted Omega guarding orphaned pups from the most powerful Alpha in the Northern Kingdom. Adrian noticed. Something almost gentle passed across his face. "You do not need to move aside," he said quietly. "A good guardian stands exactly where you are." The words reached Clara in a place no praise had touched in years. She swallowed, but before she could answer, the boy from the first stormy night stirred beside the hearth. The military cloak had slipped from his small shoulder, revealing a silver clasp shaped like a crowned wolf beneath a crescent moon. Adrian went still. Not the stillness of anger. The stillness of a man whose past had just stepped into the room wearing a child's face. Clara looked down at the clasp, then back at him. "He came almost frozen," she said softly. "The wolf brought him. I did not know who he was." Adrian crossed the room with careful steps and knelt several feet away from the boy, leaving enough distance for the child to feel safe. The pups watched him with wide, silent eyes. The little boy blinked awake, confused, then looked at the king's face. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Adrian's voice changed when he spoke, losing its royal edge until only grief and wonder remained. "Elias." Clara felt the name ripple through the cabin. Daniel made a faint sound from the doorway, but no one looked at him. The boy's small fingers tightened around the quilt. "Uncle Adrian?" The king closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they shone like winter under sunrise. He did not grab the child. He did not frighten him with the force of his relief. He only lowered his head, one hand pressed over his heart, as if honoring someone too precious to be touched without permission. "Yes, little prince," he whispered. "I am here." Clara's knees nearly weakened beneath her. "Prince." The word made the cabin seem to tilt around her. The child she had warmed against her own chest, the boy whose breath she had begged back from the cold, was not only another orphaned pup. He was Elias Blackwood, the lost royal heir the kingdom had mourned in rumors and guarded silence. Adrian looked at Clara then, and she saw the truth before he said it. His wolves had not been bringing random children to her door. They had been searching, testing every road, every pack, every heart that still knew mercy. The royal convoy was separated during the blizzard, Adrian said, his voice controlled for the children's sake. Several pups from protected houses disappeared in the chaos. We tracked them through 3 territories, but the trail kept breaking. Then my wolves began returning here. His gaze moved to the children clustered near the fire. Not because this place was marked on any map. He looked back at Clara. Because you were. Clara shook her head slightly. "I am nobody." Adrian rose, and the room seemed to rise with him. "No," he said, with such quiet certainty that even the fire sounded softer. "Nobody is the title given by people who failed to recognize a soul before it saved what they abandoned." Daniel finally stepped into the doorway, pale and rigid. "Your Majesty, I had no knowledge that the boy was royal. Had I known, I would have taken proper action." Adrian turned to him. The gentleness vanished, replaced by something colder than the snow outside. "That is the problem, Daniel Cross. You needed a crown on a child before you could see a life." The word settled over the room like judgment. Then Elias slid from beneath the quilt and walked unsteadily to Clara. He did not run to the king. He reached for her hand first. Clara looked down, stunned, as his small fingers wrapped around hers. "She stayed," Elias whispered. "When I was cold. She stayed." Adrian's expression broke for one brief, human second. Then the Alpha King bowed his head to Clara Whitfield in front of every child, every wolf, and every man who had come to take them away. "Then the kingdom owes her more than gratitude," he said. "It owes her change." The cabin did not cheer at first. The children were too tired for celebration, and Clara had learned that relief could be so large it arrived silently. Elias stood beside her with one hand in hers and the other tucked against his chest, watching the Alpha King as if hope itself needed time to become familiar. Outside, royal wolves held the clearing in a perfect circle, their dark shape steady beneath the moonless sky. Daniel Cross remained near the doorway, no longer the man who had come to command, but a local alpha suddenly small beneath the weight of what he had failed to protect. Adrian Blackwood turned to him, his voice calm enough to frighten the truth out of every excuse. By royal order, your authority over Blackpine children is suspended until a full inquiry is complete. No pup under your jurisdiction will be removed, separated, or judged by bloodline before being seen as a child first. Daniel lowered his eyes. The councilman behind him did the same. There was no shouting. There needed to be none. Some justice came quietly, with witnesses, law, and a door finally opening for the right person. Adrian faced Clara again. This cabin is now under crown protection. No one enters without your consent. No one takes what you have sheltered. Clara looked around the room, at the bowls stacked beside the sink, the blankets uneven on the floor, the small faces turned toward her as if she were the answer to a question they had been afraid to ask. Crown protection sounded grand, impossible, almost too heavy for a house that leaned when the wind pushed hard. Your Majesty, she said carefully, protection is not enough if tomorrow brings another child to the road. Adrian studied her, and for the first time, the Winter King looked less like a legend and more like a man who understood he had arrived late. Then tell me what is enough. Clara's throat tightened. No one had ever asked her that. Not the nursery council. Not Blackpine. Not any person who had called her soft and meant useless. She looked down as Elias pressed closer to her side, then at Noah, sleeping peacefully after a night that should have broken him, then at Ella holding her worn rabbit like a promise. A place, Clara said. Not a holding room. Not a camp. A real place. Warm beds. Doctors who do not ask which pack a child belongs to before treating a fever. Teachers. Food. Someone to remember their birthdays. And if your wolves bring another pup to my door, I go with them. Adrian's silver eyes softened. You would still choose them, after everything this night has cost you? Clara almost smiled. They were never the cost. They were the reason. Something in the room changed then, not magic exactly, but recognition. The old kind. The kind stories tried to explain with words like fate, though fate felt too distant for something so tender and immediate. Adrian lowered himself to one knee before her, not as a king demanding loyalty, but as a ruler accepting a truth greater than his crown. Then by my name and by the law of the Northern Kingdom, this house shall become the first moonlit sanctuary. Every orphaned pup found in any territory will have a place here, or in every home we build after it. He looked toward the children. And no child in my kingdom will ever again have to be royal before being rescued. Clara felt the words enter the walls like warmth. Hannah began to cry softly, but this time no one told her to be quiet. Mason wiped his face with both sleeves. Lily, silent Lily, whispered one word. Home. Adrian heard it. So did Clara. So did every wolf outside, because a low, gentle howl rose from the clearing, not mournful now, but bright with promise. By sunrise, wagons arrived with blankets, food, milk, medicine, and carpenters carrying tools instead of orders. Daniel and his men left under royal guard, not dragged away, not shamed for spectacle, but removed from the lives they had treated as burdens. Clara stood on the porch with Elias wrapped in her shawl and the other pups crowded around her legs. Adrian came to stand beside her, close enough that the cold no longer felt as sharp. Together, they watched the first light spill over Blackpine, turning the snow gold. You said you would build a kingdom worthy of them, Clara said. Adrian looked at the children, then at her. I will, he answered. But only if you help me remember what worthy means. Clara looked at the crooked cabin, the smoke rising from its chimney, and the children who no longer stood like guests waiting to be sent away. For the first time in years, she did not feel like an omega at the edge of someone else's world. She felt like the beginning of a better one. And when the black wolf at the tree line bowed its head once more, Clara finally understood. The wolves had not brought the children because she had nothing. They had brought them because she had the one thing the kingdom had almost forgotten how to give. She had room.